Hello friends, this is Jim with Science Talk. I have a story here talking about Arctic permafrost. I have covered with this topic with you guys before, but as always, I like to bring you the updates. As more science is done, more information is gathered. So I'd like to share with you quickly two new studies that have been published talking about what's happening with the Arctic permafrost. Basically, the summation is that it's going to be faster carbon leak. That's basically what they're finding. So, researchers have learned more about the intricate mechanisms of what goes on in the Arctic permafrost, intricate mechanisms in how the thawing process takes place. And what they have learned is unsettling. Now, of course, we know what the permafrost is. It's basically ground that is permanently frozen, save from maybe a seasonal thaw layer in the upper layers closest to the surface. And of course, there's a huge store of frozen organic carbon. And when the organic carbon, when the permafrost starts to thaw, the organic carbon starts to break down because it can be worked on by microorganisms, typically methane and CO2, but a lot of methane is released. And of course, this methane, this CO2, the greenhouse gases, will absorb more heat, trap more heat, further accelerating the thawing process, further accelerating the release. Basically, a very nasty little positive feedback loop is set up. So a 42-year-long study of atmospheric carbon dioxide over the north slope of Alaska reveals that the cycling time, which is defined as the time a quantity of carbon is locked away in the frozen ground, in the tundra, has been reduced by more than 13% over 4 decades. So what is happening is typically in the past, the Arctic, the tundra, has been what's called a carbon sink. Carbon is sequestered out of the atmosphere. Plants take it in, plants die, biomass goes into the ground, and it's sequestered away. Well, now the Arctic is turning into a carbon source. As the permafrost thaws, this carbon that's been stored and sequestered for millennia is now being released. So that's a problem. So the world's greatest single store of, if you could think of it as ancient sunshine, right? Because you've got peat, you've got other preserved vegetation. This is, plants that use sunshine from way back when to do their photosynthesis, and then they die and they're locked away, is about to now release more and more of the CO2. All decay from foliage and wood is done by soil microbes. Researchers have now taken more than 200 samples from a stretch of once frozen bog and fen is just another word for bog, in northern Sweden, to identify the genomic mix of fungi, bacteria, and archaeobacteria, ready and waiting to start working on the vegetation to return the carbon back into the atmosphere. In other words, return it as atmospheric carbon, i.e. CO2, CH4, as opposed to being locked up in cellulose, carbohydrates, that sort of thing. So in the first study is published in the journal Science Advances. This is a collaborative study involving Korean, US, and Chinese scientists, and they went through the data archives of the US National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and they analyzed variations in carbon dioxide over Barrow, Alaska between 1974 and 2015. Now, in Barrow, Alaska, there is a NOAA hut, and for lack of a better word, I've been there, and it is a station. Now it's automated, and every so often someone shows up to download the data. But basically, it is a weather station that's been running continuously, nonstop, since the 1940s. So they've been measuring air temperature, humidity, wind speed and direction, precipitation, and other parameters. And as well as take a measurement of various concentrations of gases. So this has been, this station is full of vital information, and these scientists avail themselves of this information. As can be expected, levels vary naturally from season to season, just like we talk about the planet has warmed by 1.3 degrees C, but in the course of any 24-hour period at most locations, the swing in temperatures is considerably greater than 1.3 degrees C, because 1.3 degrees C is an average, which is measured over all times of the day from all locations on the planet. If I draw a bunch of jagged, spiked graph, that's weather. If I fit a line through that, that's your climate. So there's going to be seasonal variations as the plants flower, bloom, die back, especially during the very brief polar summer. But over the 42-year span of the study, the scientists found a pattern of change. Respiration during the early cold season was, under the warming of the last 4 decades, beginning to outpace the take-up of carbon during the growing season. As the tundra dwindled and the boreal woodlands began to move their range further northward. A respiration, we think respiration as the actual process of breathing, breathing through your nose, inhalation, exhalation. But respiration refers to cellular respiration. That is the breakdown of glucose into CO2, carbon dioxide, and water, plus energy. Plants take the plants take the CO2 and the water, and with sunlight energy, they then make glucose and release oxygen. So respiration is using the oxygen to break down the glucose. So respiration is now outpacing, meaning is a net CO2 to the atmosphere than a net gain of CO2 versus a net loss of CO2. In other words, it's switching from being a carbon sink to a carbon source. That's basically what this is saying. The scientists warned that by 2100, this potentially means an increase in atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases, an increase from about 50 billion tons of carbon to 200 billion tons of carbon, 4-fold increase. That is not going to bode well. That's more heat-trapping gases. A second study, which attempts to provide a more accurate prediction, involving Swedish and U.S. researchers, as well as Australian microbiologists, report in the journal Nature that they were able to develop more powerful software to look at the DNA of 1,500 microbe samples, and these microbe samples are new descriptions to science, i.e. new species, and they were all found in the partially thawed, frozen permafrost. And they looked at the first 3 meters of northern Swedish permafrost. With the extra analyses, more analyses, they gained a better understanding of the biochemistry of change in the permafrost, and they're going to use this to make more accurate predictions of global warming. Ben Woodcroft of the Australian Centre for Ecogenomics at the University of Queensland, he led the research. He states, as global temperatures rise, large amounts of carbon sequestered in perennially frozen permafrost are becoming available for microbial degradation. That's just a fancy way of saying microbes will break down the organic material and release CO2 and methane into the atmosphere. He continues, until now, accurate prediction of greenhouse gas emissions produced from thawing permafrost has been limited by our understanding of permafrost microbial communities and their carbon metabolisms. Now they're getting a better handle on these microbial communities, identifying more species, understanding their physiology and how they metabolize carbon, and with that information, a new technique to measure, they can make better predictions as to how much more greenhouse gases will be released into the atmosphere, and then from that you can make better predictions as to how much warming can be expected as a result. So basically new promising techniques to further our knowledge and our understanding. That's what science is about, right? So thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon. Hey folks, this is Jim here reminding you to subscribe to this channel, to share my videos, tell others of the work that I do here. I also ask that if you are not already a patron at Patreon, to please consider becoming a patron at Patreon. You can find the information in the description box below the video. I'm asking you to help support the work that I do. I do not take any money from corporations or from any other sources, so the information I share with you is the actual science as it comes out of the peer-reviewed journals. So there is no BS, there's no propaganda, there's no agenda. It's just I present the science and I explain to you what it means, or at least my interpretations of it, based on my own experience as a scientist. I want this channel to grow. I consider, while I discuss many different topics here, you notice I do focus a lot on climate issues. I consider climate change to be the most pressing issue facing humanity today. Thus, I consider it important to disseminate this information to a wider and wider, more and more people. And I need your help to do this. So, yes, please subscribe. Please tell others of the work that I do here. Please share my videos on social media platforms, with your social media groups, what have you. We need to get this information out there. So for those of you who are supporting me on Patreon, I thank you greatly for your support and continued support. It does mean a lot to me. So together we can get this information to more and more people. Thank you. Thank you for your support.